G'day guys and welcome to another episode of the Pumped on Property Show podcast. Now in this one, Simon and I are going to sort of explain the process for those of you out there looking to buy your first investment property. In today's potty, we get kind of deep about talking about how to identify where you are right now, where you're looking to be shorter and longer term, getting real about those things that are holding you back, as well as going into sort of a bit more of the nuts and bolts. So who do you need and how to build that world-class team of advisors, as well as some of the fundamentals around property investing. So which market should you buy in, which suburbs should you be looking at, and what type of properties. So our goal by the end of today's potty is really to just give you the nuts and bolts and everything you absolutely need to go out there later this year or early next year and have the confidence to absolutely smash it on your own.
So how much do you wish you had this podcast back when you bought your first property? When was it? 2011?
2011, it would have been helpful because I had no idea what I was fucking doing, at all.
Seriously, it's the biggest decision that we ever make, right? Like at the end of the day, buying your first property, buying your first investment property is the biggest financial decision that you'll ever make. Because generally, you know, you're at your lowest income level, you're going to be at the highest debt position, you don't have any experience, you don't have that team of advisors around you. And one thing I find is really common as well, people don't have that community of like-minded people. They don't have anyone that they can talk about it with that's not going to judge them.
Yeah, without a doubt. Like I remember so distinctly well that I sat down with a couple of mates in Sydney who are still like some of my best mates today. And we were like, okay, we're going to do this together because none of us had enough deposit to do it on our own. And so we spent about 6 to 9 months looking for properties. And I remember us just deciding, well, let's just buy a suburb, like 3 suburbs from where we grew up after all of our research and exploring. And I remember finding this little 2-bedroom unit that was on a main road that had ridiculously high body corporates that was pretty much considered like a crack den. I later found out with like one of 500 odd units. And I put together this like 60, maybe even 70-page report on this property with everything I could find. And I sent it to the only rich person that I knew at the time that would listen to me. And he read the report for me and he's like, and I said, well, what do you think about this investment? And he's like, one thing I know is that you're good at research and it's going to serve you well, but I've got no idea if this is a good investment or not because I was looking at all of the wrong stuff. And so that's what the purpose of this potty is today, to really help people figure out the right stuff and not spend 6 to 9 months like spinning your wheels and ending up with the wrong outcome anyway.
It's so funny because mine was the complete opposite as well. You know, I was super fortunate to have such a good support network around me. Also the knowledge as to how to do it. And, you know, it just made, like, I always talk about how, and I feel arrogant saying it, but how simple that first investment property was for me to buy because, you know, I just didn't have all of these question marks. I didn't have all of these unknowns. I was very fortunate to be surrounded by so many people that wanted me to succeed and they knew what I needed to do to help me succeed as well.
So I bought a 2-bedroom unit in a crack den, one of 500, for more than it was worth on a main road next to a soccer oval and a train station.
One thing you got right though, timing.
The timing was good because it was the very start of the news cycle after the GFC. So I didn't even know because I was at uni that we're in a GFC. And everyone was like, why are you buying now? Everything's been so bad. I'm like, well, isn't that what you do? Like, when you can afford to buy something,
I've got money.
yeah. But you know, what about yours? Like yours was your first property was like northern beaches of Brisbane, walking distance to the water.
Yeah. Like you actually bought like 2 houses down from me a few years later. Like it was just what I could afford at the time. So I think that's important to recognize. Like we do have to kind of fit a square peg into a round hole for the first time investors. Because like if I had my time over again, like I probably would have bought in Bedina, you know, on the Sunshine Coast, one of the best suburbs in Australia.
Yeah.
But, you know, my budget didn't allow it. So it's like I had to make some concessions and sacrifices. So I was like, okay, well, where in Brizzy can I afford that I think is undervalued right now? And we'd already done a lot of the suburb research. We'd already looked at over 420 suburbs in Brisbane and we'd gone, look, like this is kind of like buying in, you know, Woolaware of Sydney. Like this is kind of like buying in, you know, those beachside suburbs of the Sutherland Shire, but it's like mid to high threes. instead of over $1 million. So it's
Yeah.
just a bit of a no-brainer. So I knew like I had to buy a house because I wanted to secure the land value. I wanted to be walking distance to the beaches because history suggests that that always ends up generating an above average capital growth rate. These suburbs were kind of old in the time, like 2018 is when I bought it, which is crazy to think that's 7 years ago now,
Wow.
right?
That's cool.
But it did have like a lower socioeconomic demographic in Margate on the Redcliffe Peninsula. It did have a higher percentage of renters, but we could see the times changing because your wife and their family, they grew up on that peninsula, and just hearing the stories of what it was like 20, 30 years ago
Pretty rough, I think.
compared to what it is today, and then fast forward 7 years, it's a completely different market once again.
And that's the beautiful thing about observing markets like Sydney or parts of Melbourne, that you can see what Perths and Adelaides and Brisbanes can become because you've seen it happen in Sydney.
Exactly.
And there's suburbs in Sydney, like Redfern, for example, that the cops wouldn't drive down 20 years ago, that are now some of the most expensive suburbs in Sydney, or somewhere like King's Cross. Like, that place was absolutely ghetto growing up and one of the most hectic places in Australia for 50 years. And now, there's elements to it that are still rough.
Yeah,
And
there's
it's
little
not Rose
pockets.
Bay, but it is a hell of a lot nicer. And that's because at some point people recognize that even the last place standing or the worst brand name at the time, if it's close to amenities, the city, and the water, it's going to end up popping over time.
That's it. Like you look at even your Sutherlands and your Bankstowns and your Penriths and these types of areas that have just, tripled over the last 30 years. So, sometimes we've got to remove a little bit of that emotion from it. Obviously, still did well from that property, but like, made every mistake buying the high density unit, buying on the main road, buying in your backyard. If you had your time over again, I'm sure you would have, probably gone for maybe a house in Wollongong or a house on the Central Coast as opposed to that apartment.
Yeah, without a doubt. But you make the best decisions that you can at the time. And what I've realized about property, if you've got a longer term horizon, it all ends up working out.
Yeah.
But the things that you and I have learned from history and from the likes of Core Logic is that houses have outperformed units in Australia by about 125% in the last 30 years, according to Core Logic. And then metro markets have outperformed regional markets by about the same percentage. So I didn't have that information 15 years ago when I was getting started, but I have it now. And so what Simon and I are trying to do is use history and best practice and fundamentals to drive decision making versus emotion or what our mums and dads want for us as protective parents. And so I think that segues really well into the first step is often the hardest by far. So how do you actually figure out where you are? Like, how do you take a bit of a stock take of your own position and go, can I even do something or not this year?
Yeah, well, I think it always starts with the willingness. So it's like I want to invest in property. I've seen other people do it. I've watched these YouTube videos or podcasts, and I've seen it work. So it's like that willingness, and then once you've got the willingness to jump in the deep end and try something that can change your life forever, it's really looking at where are you at right now. How much are you earning, and depending on what you do is going to dictate how much you earn. A lot of the first timers that we work with are earning somewhere between about $70,000 a year up to about 100. Some people fortunate enough to be earning maybe $120,000 per year. And in this day and age, in 2025, that doesn't go as far as it used to because property values are quite high. So it's looking about how much are you earning right now? How much access to savings do you have? Have you used any of these super saver schemes or something like that? Are you going to buy your first home to live in? Are you going to choose an investment? Will you leverage off any of these government grants? And a quick Google search can help you understand everything that you need to know about any of those government grants and whether or not you can gain access to it. But for me, I think it's rather than trying to do it all alone, starting to surround yourself with a bit of a team and, maybe getting a referral from somebody that you know and trust that's been there and done that, and communicating with their finance broker, their mortgage broker, or their bank manager to like actually go to a bank and say, look, this is how much I earn. This is how much I've got saved right now. What will that allow me to do?
And I got a lot of no's in the first 10 years. I still get a lot of no's actually from the bank.
Yeah, me too.
And so, that's just the game. The game is, can I borrow money? Yes, cool. Can I borrow money? No. And instead of what I did for about the first 3 years or 4 years was just walk away and go, okay, well, they've said no. But the question is, well, what do I have to do? Like, do I have to save some more money? Can I get a guarantor to help me with it, like a family member? What savings do I actually need? Or is there a way to reduce the costs in my life or get rid of a car loan or a credit card to increase my capacity? That question of like asking that broker or that bank manager, what can I do, will change the conversation from a no to a, well, you're not that far away. You just need to do these 3 or 4 things generally over the next 6 months and you'll be able to get in.
And I think the mistake that a lot of first timers make is they go to their bank because, like, I set up a savings account when I was 12 years old, and I've been putting my money in there since then. So, I'm just going to go directly to Westpac or ANZ or St. George or whoever
Because
their
I'm
private
loyal, right?
banking is, because I'm loyal. You'll realize how loyal the banks are to you in the future. And then so you go that, and that, like, we had one of the guys recently, Harley, he goes to the bank and they say, mate, you can't even get access to, a $10,000 credit card right now. You're just not in the position to be able to get a loan. And then he's walked away really disappointed and like, fuck, like I can't do anything. And then he reached out to us because one of his best mates had bought a property through us. And then we said, well, why don't you talk to our mortgage broker, Clay, from Mortgage Choice? And 3 days later, we had a meeting with Clay. He analysed his situation and said, mate, you've got so much savings here.
His
Whilst,
income was really high too. Like, I don't get it.
yeah, but he's like, no, that bank shut the door on you because their policies don't allow you to get a loan. But I've got access to 25 other lenders that are more than happy to provide you with a loan at the moment, and a good loan with a big bank. So it's not going to somebody different and putting yourself in a risky position. It's just exploring the market, and that's what a mortgage broker is there to do. Fortunately, we don't have to pay them either.
Yeah, that's right. Like the bank pays those guys, which is great. And as you said, they've got a panel of 20 odd lenders so they can choose the best product for you. I think there's two types of first time buyers. There's the type that you and I were, which lower incomes at the time of buying, low savings, and pretty low living costs as well. And they're kind of like, well, you can borrow 400K, here you go. And then there are a lot of first timers that we work with as well that have combined incomes of 100 to 300K that are at a different stage of life. Like they might own their own home, but they want to buy an investment property. But they've, like me and you, they've got kids. And the bank might actually go, hey, you can borrow 1.2 million bucks. And they're like, hang on,
That's way too much.
just because you can borrow it or spend it doesn't mean you should. And I think it's equally important to not just go, well, that's what they've said I can do, let's go out and do it, and put yourself in a vulnerable, risky position, and more just learn about the market, which we'll talk about more in a moment, and choose the right product for what you want to achieve in the future.
So then next step from there is looking at, where do you want to be? Nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows what the future is going to look like, but we all understand ourselves better than anybody else does. And it's important to just take stock and go, okay, well, where do I want to be 12 months from now? What's the short term, most actionable goals that I can achieve? And then where do I want to be in the long term? Because that does typically dictate the decision that you're going to make in the short term anyway. So how do we go about thinking about where we're going to be,
I find setting a goal for the next 12 months is significantly easier personally. So in my life, right, I understand what my values are, and that's a whole nother potty. But in terms of, like, let's say three of the more important things for most people is like relationships, connection, meaning with people we care about.
Mm-hmm.
That
Freedom.
family, freedom, that's all that sort of category of like the softer, more beautiful things, the simple things that make life so full. And then there's, for a lot of people, health, like, health is wealth in a lot of ways. And then there's the career or business or financial freedom through property or stocks or gold or whatever your like vice is that you're working towards. And so I think it's important to recognize that in the next 12 months, it's very easy if you're setting a health goal to go, okay, I want to work towards a marathon, because buying a property is kind of like that. And in 12 months' time, I want to run it. Well, how long's a marathon? 42 point whatever Ks. I'm probably not going to be able to show up on the day and just wing it, which is cool. Like
Unless you're Hayden.
some people can.
Our colleague Hayden showed up to a 50K ultra, yeah, with like
6 weeks training. Or
6 weeks training. Not even really. He said like the max he run was about 15Ks before that. But he's just an athlete. He can do whatever he puts his mind
And there's
to.
a lot of Ned Brockmans listening to this sort of stuff out there. They're just like, challenge accepted. I'll run one this weekend and I'll show up in your DMs. And I'm like, go you guys. But I'm like, if you want to, Hayden's still not able to run it 5 weeks later because he smashed his body. And when I did the marathon as well, like I'd only done 26 Ks and then I literally couldn't run for like 2 years after I did it because I like hurt myself.
Shin splints for years.
And so, you know, a property's sort of the same thing. You can just get out there and wing it. And that's one approach. And that's probably the approach that I took. It's like, I'll just buy close to home and won't learn about the market because there wasn't YouTube and podcasts, and I won't find a team of advisors and ask some people like, you know, what do you think based on my situation first?
And it's so funny that you went, like you did all this research and you looked into all of this information that you could gain access to, but then you still reverted back to just what feels good.
Yeah, and I also didn't know that metro or houses or 600 blocks or quiet streets, like I just didn't have the thing that we've got now, which is a blueprint of like what successful investing looks like from hundreds of years worth of experience. And then there's the second approach, which is like exactly how I go about it now. Like, what can I save? What can I borrow? And what is my goal? Now, one of my goals, there's only really 3 goals I ever have with investing: do nothing. And there's periods as an investor where you do nothing. There's, I'm going to buy. So what do I need to do that? Or I can't buy and I need to save some money. And most first timers have a desire, like you said, to get into the market, but they either can't, and so they've got to save more money or get rid of some credit cards or whatever, or they're just ready to buy. And then we move from there into the longer term picture. Now, for me, in that particular category of my life, it is crystal clear. The original goal was 30K a year of passive income. Then it jumped to 100K per year. And now it's at 200K per year is what I'm working towards. And I'm not there yet after 15 years, but I'm on the way to achieving that. And so for me, financially, how many properties do I need to achieve 200K? And then more importantly than that, like, why am I doing it? And for me, the why is to spend time with my kids and my family, to look after myself better, to help other people in my life, and to be able to spend my time serving. From a business perspective, I know the real estate way is just like every company out there is like, we just want to do more and get bigger. Where it's like, for me and you, it's actually like, we just want to work with 2, maybe 3 absolute legends a week. So having a business where you and I don't have to earn millions of dollars every single year to survive, but we can like really handpick the people that we want to work with and have a meaningful impact on those people that want the same things as us.
And this will lead into what we'll talk about in a moment, but I think a lot of people at the beginning really don't know where they want to be in the future, nor do they know how to achieve it. And I find a lot of people, and this is just playing devil's advocate, they overset those expectations. You know, I'll talk to people and they might be earning $250,000 per year combined, which is a great lifestyle. Then, you know, they're paying 35, 40 cents in the dollar to the tax man, and then they're paying, you know, $700 to $1,000 per week to rent or something like that. So the amount of money that they're actually living off on a weekly basis to enjoy their life is far less than what they may set for the future. And so I always like to play devil's advocate and challenge people and be like, look, you know, I understand you might want to go for, you know, $3 or $4 or $500,000 per year of passive income, but are you happy now living off the, you know, 70 grand per year that you're living off net?
Let's just start with 100K, like, you know, make it simple. And once you do that, you can go to a mill because you know how.
Exactly. So once you've got that blueprint and you've got the experience, you can push that envelope further like you have. It's like you thought it was 30, you know, you got close to there and it's like, well, that's probably not going to cut it. I've, you know, got a wife and 3 kids now. And then, you know,
That's petrol.
It obviously then lifestyle changes. You obviously things cost more money these days as well. You want to send your kids to a better school to get a better education. So it's like quickly jumps to that next level as well. But you can move the goalposts along that journey because you're in the market, you're doing it. And the same thing happened to me. You know, it started with 50, then it went to 100. Now it's about 150. And, you know, even 150 I know is more than what I need.
Because there also comes a time in your life when your kids aren't at home and they're not costing you everything because they're all into sports and tutoring, or they're driving around and you need two massive cars to take them around, or they're physically eating $500 a week worth of food and they've got 30 grand a year worth of, sport clothes and like whatever it is in their life, like school fees. And so a lot of the older clients that we work with are just like, 2 grand a week after all of the expenses in my life just to play with, like that's a hell of a place to be,
And a lot of people's money gets tied up to rent or a mortgage as well.
without
It's
a
like,
doubt.
what if you had no rent to pay because you own your own home outright? And all you got to pay for is your insurances, your rates, your water, your electricity, internet, your food. Like those things are manageable. So I think just that requires a bit more work. And you mentioned something as a bit of a throwaway comment before, like the fact that you understand your values. I couldn't recommend highly enough for first timers to actually think about who they are and what their values are.
Yeah.
Because once you understand that and you start living in alignment with your values, you realize a lot of the things that you think matter don't matter. So, you know, figuring out a way to do that, once again, just a quick Google search, like how do I understand my values, and play with those things, because it's a fun project to do. And once you figure out what your true values are, you will really, start to live a much better quality of life. And I think it was the happiness trap that helped you,
Yeah,
wasn't it?
the happiness trap was really important for me. And it's got some value cards that you can order for like $20. And all you do is like, there's like 200 cards or 100 cards, and it might say like acceptance or self-love or community or whatever the values are, like discipline or, whatever, like wealth. And you just put the cards into a yes, no pile. And then it's like, these are no's, these are yeses, yes, no pile 3 times. And you end up being left with about 20 cards, 30 cards. And then you put them out like into 3 rows, most important to least, throw away the third row, do the same thing again, throw it away. And then when you've got about 5 or 6 cards left, you put them in some sort of order that feels good to you. And I just redid, because I've been doing the coaching at the moment with Mick Fanning's ex-coach, Nam, and we went through the same thing, but there was about 400 or 500 words this time. And I went through them, and it's just like, what came out for me was freedom, self-love, connection, like responsibility, acceptance. And I'd been operating, thinking like my lizard brain was like, be super healthy, be super disciplined, like become
Whatever it
wealthy,
might
become
be.
financially free. And it's like it puts the categories and the roles that you play, like, do good work. But what I found from redoing those values cards like 7 or 8 years after I'd done them is the person that I was back then was very fearful, very scared, like very desperate to achieve something. And then as someone who's like made a lot more peace with myself and like transitioned to like more time off and more holidays and more balance and more like less is more as an idea of the way that I live in, like not materially necessarily, but more just in terms of like how I spend my time and and more holidays and stuff. I was like, actually what I want as I get older is just to be a good person that can help other people. And I think if the why is connected to money like mine was when I first started out, like I'd be listening to this at 24 and just going, fuck, bro. Easy for you to say.
Yeah,
But
straight over the head.
what I and you got that even at that age. Like I've
Yeah,
always had a philosophical side, and I
me
think
too.
anyone listening to this feels the
Growing up
same
in
way.
a Christian family, like going to church and having those religious values, like I think you get that at an earlier age.
Yeah, like we're lucky to like just here, like treat everybody equally
Mm,
and,
mm,
treat people the way that I've treated you.
mm.
And I drifted off that for a long time, but recently I have come back to that, and it's filled that sort of hole because I truly believed as a first timer that if I could just be far enough along in my career and I could just have 6% body fat all the time, or if I could just have my kids and be married and have my dream home, or if I could have my dream business and make $1 million a year, or if I could have every property owned outright, or if I could have 10 properties in my portfolio, if I would I be happy? Would I be fulfilled? Would that hole in myself finally feel full? And I achieved everything that I ever wanted to, and I was still like pretty miserable. In fact, I was probably more miserable because I learned that achievement wasn't the only thing that would make me happy. In fact, the journey and the joy of being a first timer, as scary as it is fucking beautiful.
Definitely.
And so over time, like I've replaced things and more with more peace in my soul.
That's it.
And connection. And you know, this is really philosophical from the title and the way that you and I wanted to go. But I wish I had heard it earlier to go, it's the Jim Crow quote. I wish everyone could be rich and famous so that everyone would realize that being rich and famous doesn't make you happy.
Exactly.
And the sooner you recognize that, then the sooner you can get on with it. Like I spoke to two legends yesterday. Absolute, some of the coolest people we've ever worked with. They've just had a kid. One's a solicitor. One's an online marketing dude. They just bought their first property, a 6 or 7 year old dual occupancy property in Brisbane. Paid $850 for it. It should rent for over $1,000 a week. Like, nailed it. I said on the phone, I'm like, this is so much better than the shit box that I bought first time around, because you achieved and ticked so many boxes. But at the start of the call, they were so anxious because they've just gone into 800K of debt. They've just stepped completely out of their comfort zone, and they're having that normal, my world's melting down. I've gone from 100K savings to nothing. And on top of that, every time I look in my bank account, there's now 800K of debt. And they said that I said, well, what do you really want? And they listed off like 30 things. And I'm like, I feel that's like my anxiety talking. When I want heaps of things and I'm really in control of my life, it's because I'm anxious as fuck. When I surrender and let go in the small, minuscule moments of my life that I've allowed that to happen, which is almost never, I know I'm in the flow. And I said to them, what do you really, really, really want? And she said, I want freedom to feel not guilty because I'm leaving my kid for 60 hours a week in Sydney. And I want the opportunity to do meaningful, purposeful, why-driven work. And I want the opportunity to become the person that I was born to be. And I'm like, you know, before that, they said we want 500 grand a year of passive income. We want to own a whole, like 10 plus small businesses that other people are running for us. And we want this big life. And I'm like, this is the trap between the brain projecting what it wants into the future, which is anxiety producing.
Society does it too.
Yeah, like hustle culture. Like, you can't jump on Instagram without seeing someone killing it.
No, everyone's doing better than you are.
And so it's just like, and by the end of the call, they were so calm, so excited. And I'm like, you know, I wish for that 10 years that I was anxious as fuck as I was starting out my journey and pushing to like 10 or 15 properties, that someone had just said, it's okay. Start with one, get to 100K a year of income, and figure out what you love along the way and move your life into alignment with that. And that will be happiness on a day-to-day basis.
100%. Hey, it's
a long way to get to where do you want to be, but know where you want to be in 12 months, know where you want to be in the future.
And we always say, like, if you had the hindsight of experience, you know, you would implement these things a lot sooner. And I don't know how many times we've heard this from, you know, rich and famous people or people that have been there and done that, until it actually sinks in and people start to realize that, you know, what I think I want isn't really what I want. And so actually doing the work to figure it all out, like you have, like most of the amazing people that we get to work with eventually do. And you know, I'm still on that journey for myself as well. But, you know, life's a journey, and you just got to roll through that wild roller coaster. And
just
you
when
know,
you figure it out, man, your next challenge appears, and it helps you grow again. And it's much easier, don't you reckon, in life to find things that you don't want than it is to find the things that you do. And so I highly recommend for the first timers, figure out what you don't want. You know, I can almost guarantee that nobody necessarily wants to be doing non-meaningful work in our day and age.
No.
I don't think anyone necessarily chooses to get up in the morning and wants to feel worse at the end of that day than they did. And so that's your choices that's your health, that's your relationships. And it's like, it's all pretty simple when you like reduce it back.
That's super relevant for property investing as well. Like our team is searching for reasons why not to buy a property.
Yeah.
We're not trying to find a reason to buy the property. We're finding a reason to try and not buy the property. And that helps us rule out 80 to 90% of properties that get presented off market, pre-market, or on market. So, life is a bit of a process of elimination to, avoid the things that you don't want. And in doing that, it'll allow you to achieve the things that you do want in life.
There's not many things left over after you shut enough doors that it just becomes simple. And I want to, I promise people by the end of this, you'll have a complete list, our list, like a modified list of like exactly how to know what that looks like for property, because
Yeah.
it is ones and zeros. That's why I like property, and that's why I like business, because I can measure it.
Mm.
It's much more difficult to measure your happiness on a moment-to-moment basis.
Yeah, almost impossible. The next thing is looking into what's holding you back as well. And I think this is a step that a lot of people miss. And I think this is a step that, you know, it takes people months or years to get into their first property as opposed to, being able to step into action and making it happen in the next few months. So, these are things that are pretty obvious, I feel. We share it with everybody on the first strategy sessions, and we ask this question, which can be intimidating to some people, and it can be sort of looking into yourself in a harder way. But it's like, some of the things that I've probably suffered from in the past is like a fear of debt, a fear of being under the thumb or under the control of the banks.
We don't like that, eh?
I don't think
Who does like
I don't
that?
think anybody likes that, but it's something that you have to become comfortable with. So my way of overcoming that fear is through education. It's reading books about how and why debt has been created. And these are difficult books to read, and they take me years to read often, but it helps me become more comfortable with the way that this system works. And then it helps me overcome that weakness that I have of being fearful of debt. And then I can, move forward with confidence. I think another one that a lot of first timers have is they just don't have that team around them. They don't have the advisors, they don't have the support networks, and maybe they've got protective and controlling parents that are, maybe giving them the wrong advice because what worked for them 20 or 30 years ago is what they're telling you to do now, even though times have changed. So, and that's hard, right? To find those people, to find those mentors and coaches and support networks that will actually help you avoid making any mistakes. And it definitely leads into another thing that holds a lot of people back, which is that I'm worried about making a mistake.
Yeah.
I know I don't work, 30, 40 hours a week, trading that time away from loved ones and things that I enjoy doing, to lose it. And when I read that statistic, which was, 60% of first time investors lose money in the first 5 years of holding an investment property, your heart starts beating and you get, so scared and you think, I don't want to be a part of that statistic. So there's so much that holds us back, but in my opinion, the awareness of what holds us back is what allows us to move through it and continue moving forward.
I love that. Like, I think you said something that's so meaningful, and it's like, it's very difficult to be vulnerable because we're in a society that is like strength orientated and like hustle mentality, and like, it's almost like a don't wear your heart on your sleeve society now, versus like what made a man or a woman strong in the past was very, very different values and virtues wise versus what it like
Too right.
a successful person looks like in this society.
That's it.
Looks so different to what like a strong person looked like 100 years ago. And I think, for me, the challenges that I faced as a first time investor, like, because I'm a very analytical person, was like information overload. Like, I thought if I could just learn it all and just listen to enough stuff, read enough stuff, research enough stuff, that underlying fear and anxiety would disappear. But the further I went down the rabbit hole, the more I realized that, like, the more I should have realized, I say, is that it's 15 years and you and I are still learning about this every day, like every single day. I thought 9 months ago that Melbourne was just as expensive as Sydney. Now I know that it's cheaper than Adelaide, Brisbane, Perth, Hobart,
Sydney, Canberra.
Sydney and Canberra. It's fucking unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
But East Melbourne's expensive,
Mm.
like $1 to $3 million a property. It's just West and North Melbourne are like a third of that price or a fourth of that price. And so we're constantly learning, we're constantly growing throughout this journey. And I think the lack of not just formal advisors like solicitors, building and pest inspectors, town planners, property managers, accountants, mortgage brokers around you is hard. That takes time to find the right people. But not having an example of someone that's actually got it right. Like there's a lot of wealthy people in property that just fucking lucked out.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people that just bought Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane 10, 15, 30 years ago, and all they did is they just held it.
Mm.
And it's like they look very successful, but like what's the strategy behind that?
Mm.
And then on top of that, like just having a mentor or someone that's walked in your shoes and it's like, I made these 15 mistakes. I'll hold your hand so that you can avoid every single one of them. Like my experience was I made every single mistake I could make. Your experience, because you came into like the journey where Crystal, myself, and a whole bunch of our advisors, like the first advisor that you ever worked with, Aaron,
Yeah, I was about
owned
to
20
say.
odd properties
Yeah.
the day that you met him.
Yeah.
And he'd been investing for 30
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Like, and then by the time you started to buy, we'd already bought $200 or $300 million worth of property for clients and talked to 3,000 people, and we'd learnt from their experiences. And I'd bought 9 or something.
Yeah. Experience matters with this type of stuff as well, because otherwise emotions lead the decisions as opposed to experience and logic and history and data.
Yeah, and so you just jumped all of those dramas, and because of it, your property doubled in the first 4 or 5 years you owned it. Yeah, there was headaches because it was a cheap property and it needed some renovation works, but you managed to maintain it at 2% interest rates all the way through to 7.5%. And now you've popped out the other side, and that property is still expected to grow, according to the financial review, by another 5 or 600K in the next 7 years. And it's just like you can pick winners first time around, but it requires either deep education or someone that's been there and done it to just hop you over it.
Yeah, 100%. So I guess from here, it's what do we need? You know, like what are these property investment goals? What is the plan? So this is like, I guess, getting into the nuts and bolts. So now that we've, figured out where we're at, where we're headed, what's holding us back, we've worked through the mental side of things and the finance side of things. And now it's like, okay, what do we actually need? What do we actually buy? And, this is the things that we've obsessed about for 15 years for you now, 8 years for myself now. And I truly believe that there is a blueprint that you can follow that leads to success in property investing.
So let's say that we're listening to like Andrew Huberman right now, like the doctor, right? Basically, if I asked you, what would he say is necessary to have a healthy life? Like you listen to way more Huberman than me, but I listen to the Shorts. Like, what would he say?
He'd say number one is sleep. So getting your sleep on track, no doubt about it. And there's so many different ways that you can do that. Hydration, so making sure that you're getting good access to water and hydration. He would say that you need to be, moving as well. Like you need cardiorespiratory exercise and resistance training. And
Run 3 times a week, weights 3 times a week is the Huberman way, but you could do a quarter of that and still be sweet.
Exactly, and he's a jacked 50-year-old dude as well, so I don't necessarily need to get down there. But there's a proper blueprint, and that's in order of priority as well. It's like sleep first, water second, exercise after that, and then
Eat well, community.
Yeah, exactly. Fifth is probably what you're putting into your body as well. Like you need to be getting access to good quality food, and if you haven't listened to a lot of his stuff, I highly recommend it because, there's once again a blueprint to making sure that you're doing the right things to put your body in the right place so you can live a long, healthy, happy life.
And if I said another question like, okay, say you're a tradesperson or you've gone through the uni path, to complete a plumbing or a carpentry or an electrical apprenticeship or to complete a university course, you have to show up one course at a time, do the required work outside of that, submit your assignments on time, complete the assessments, complete each subject on the journey to that, and then magically 3-4 years from now, you'll have figured out a few things along the way. The majority of the things that you learn in both of those things is how to learn and how to solve problems and figure stuff out.
And it costs money. You know, you spend $30,000 to $60,000 on a university degree, and then working as an apprentice, you're taking a huge wage cut to have the ability to have an experienced tradesperson teach you how to do those things. So it's an investment in yourself so that you can obviously invest in your future and create, you know, a good life for yourself and you know, a good career.
How to have a meaningful relationship's another thing that we know how to do inherently as humans. Probably don't have the convo that you and I had to have yesterday afternoon, actually in the way that we had to have it, you know, but great relationships are, if I say I'm going to do something, I follow through on my word. Like if, um, you know, like showing that you care, like being there for someone when they need it, being there for someone when they don't need it, going through shared experiences together, having similar interests together, having shared values or visions of the future together. So we know how to look after our physical selves. We know how to complete hard things like university or qualifications. We know how to build careers. We know how to build businesses. We know how to build meaningful relationships. The reason for all of those like analogies or metaphors, whatever, where's our
Analogy.
analogies, is for some reason people forget that when they talk about investing,
Mm.
and I forgot it.
I think I know why, and it's because it's the biggest decision that you've ever made in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And you're putting your faith in a future that is uncertain and unknown.
Yeah.
So that is what brings up. So, what, you know, I guess we could use last night's conversation. It's like we were both operating out of our lizard brain,
Yeah.
an emotional state, not a logical state. And that we revert back to our natural instincts as human beings when that's the response. But that happens with investing a lot of the time as well, because it is so overwhelming and so confusing, and you are putting so much faith in an unknown future. We revert back to that lizard brain. We revert back to that emotional state, and it's like, oh, fuck it, I'll just do what you know,
What's easy,
John and
what I
Jane did.
observed.
Yeah.
And so, like these absolute legends that I was talking about before earlier today on this potty was just like she came in so hot and so anxious, and I said, look, just firstly, I just wanted to say that this is so normal.
Mm,
Like
mm.
it's completely okay. You should feel like this. You've got this debt in your bank account. Your savings is gone. It's all new. It's the first step, and it's out of control. And I said, just acknowledging like that this is how I feel every time I buy, even after doing 18 of these bloody things. And you feel it
Doesn't
too.
go
Like it
away.
sucks. Like,
Even when I'm like refinancing or something like that, it's just always a bit overwhelming, and I get into that anxious state.
yeah, me too. And then I said, secondly, and logically speaking, you bought Brisbane because in the last 50 years, according to Homely or an article on Homely, actually 46 years, whatever, we could say that when you look at the total return divided by the years, Brisbane's done 9.7% per year. So if we said in the next 15 years, what you've just bought for 800 only does 5% a year, it goes from 800K to 1.6 mil. So like logically speaking, the reason you bought this market is because it's kicked ass, not just for 50 years, but for 100 years. On top of that, we've got an Olympics in 7 years, and between 1997 and 2003, it went up by 97% and rents doubled
In Sydney.
in Sydney. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to happen in Brizzy. In fact, it's certainly not. But Olympics were, regardless, even in bloody Tokyo, where there
Yep,
hasn't been speculation on property in 30 years, most places went up by 50%.
that's right.
London, Barcelona.
And like the Olympics is an easy thing to use, but it's not the Olympics. It's everything that it brings, the infrastructure redevelopments, the jobs that are required to bring that infrastructure to the market within due time. The eyeballs, like, you know, I think Olympics is the second most watched thing. I can't remember what the first is, some soccer game or whatever, maybe a cricket game. Um, but like so many eyeballs, yeah, so many eyeballs are on that massive event. And, you know, I know what Australia does really well. We market our tourism probably
best.
better than any other country in the world. And I know that that's going to hit home strong. So it's like you've got all of this infrastructure growth, job growth, population growth that come in the lead up to the Olympic Games. But then you get all this speculation and emotion and tourism and all of that around the games. Like, you know, I heard some stories of people in Sydney that owned like apartments in Homebush around the Olympic Games, and they were making like 5 grand a week
Mm.
during the Olympic Games, and that's back in 2000. Like, it's going to be insane when it actually comes to
Because
Brizzy
there'll
as
be
well.
millions of people in Southeast
But
Queensland
there'll
that
be
year.
bad things that happen, like we'll overdevelop the city.
Yeah.
Like, there'll be too many apartments, and then
No
in
one will want
20
to buy the Homebush for like 10 years after it because there's 1,000 units that they don't need.
that's it. Like 2034, vacancy rates in the CBD will go up, and there'll be a period of stagnant growth in those buildings in the city as well. So it's like, you don't want to be buying Sydney in 2003, even though if you held it through until now, it probably would have doubled since then anyway. But you obviously want to buy in that lead up to it. And I think a lot of people, if we come back to the previous one, what's holding you back? It's, I feel like I've missed the boat as well. And it's like, yeah, you have missed the boat if you're referencing it to 5 years ago. But if you're referencing to where it could be in 5 to 10 years from now, then absolutely not.
It's very early. And so what I said to her to answer this, like, what are the fundamentals, is
Mm.
the logic is the history has been great, and the 7-year potential is very high as well. And then we go, well, what fun? This is what I said to her. Like, I'm like, fundamentally on top of this, just for your logical brain, because when you're in the lizard, you forget, and you've got to move to that frontal cortex to like get clear vision again. And I said, we chose Brisbane because it is undervalued right now. Not everywhere, like out of the 420 suburbs, 370 of them are pretty priced well right now. And about 60 of them look bloody good. And that's why we're still looking at some of those suburbs. And then I said, well, the city's cranked, the eastern beaches have cranked, the north side's cranked, but the place that you chose, southwest Brisbane, is the most affordable area of the city close to the CBD still. So we chose that for that reason. And then on top of that, the population in that area is expected to double. There's train lines, there's main roads, there's universities, there's shopping centres, there's a new CBD projected to be built out there, there's jobs being created, there's families moving everywhere to there because it's affordable. And then on top of that, we looked at 80 suburbs in that area, and we chose 8 of them that look great statistically. So all of them have really high incomes on average, lower percentages of renters, low vacancy rates, great DSR scores, etc., etc., etc. And then within that suburb, we profiled it, and then we went, let's avoid housing commission, let's avoid flooding, let's avoid landslide overlays.
Let's avoid all the main roads.
No main roads, nothing next to shopping centres or schools, etc. And then we know that 600 square metre blocks, when you can afford to buy them, is the sweet spot. Although smaller blocks perform equally as well, but bigger the better in property. And then we knew we wanted a 3 or a 4 bedroom home, but you actually wanted 2 incomes, so we got you a dual lock. And we got it in a nice pocket of the suburb in a quiet street. And it's like the fundamentals aren't actually that hard. It's just what you would have bought if you were raising your family, or what your parents bought in the past that worked really well. And the fundamentals are that simple. Like, it really is that list plus a few other things that we overlay. So if it's on a main street, don't buy it. If the block's 200 square meters and that's all you can afford, okay. But if you can afford more, get a 400 or an 800 or a 600 square meter block. Like, it's not that complicated. Like, if you're looking for something tenant ready and lower maintenance, buy something in better condition that's brick, tile, slab on ground. If you can't afford that, then do what you and I did at the start, which is buy shittier older homes and figure out what to do with them in the future and pay the maintenance as you go.
That's it. It's simple, and to just recap on that, it's like the biggest metro markets, if you can afford that.
Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide.
If you can't afford that, the biggest regional markets that are in close proximity to those metro markets. So, your Geelongs, your Morningtons, your Ballarat, your Bendigos, your, Shoalhavens, Illawarras, Central Coast, Newcastle, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Townsville, Toowoomba. Is it Rockingham down in southwest Perth or something like that?
That's
That
heaps nice there, actually.
Yeah, like there is all of these options that are there for you. And then once you've figured out which one of those markets is in the right stage of its real estate cycle and has more upside potential, hasn't yet realized its full potential, going for, if you can afford a house, always ideally going for a house in those locations. But if you can't afford a house, or if you're not somebody that considers himself as an active investor, and maybe you're super time poor, And it's like, well, I don't want to own a old high maintenance house. You know, I just want to own a modern, super low maintenance, 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom, double story townhouse on a 200 square block. Like that is your next best alternative. And then all of these other things that you just mentioned in terms of that suburb profile as well. But what we're really trying to get at there is, what are we trying to avoid? Well, we're trying to avoid like small regional towns that don't have any growth prospects. Trying to avoid trying to avoid buying in areas that have been on an absolute tear and have maybe realized their potential. Trying to avoid small blocks of land or really apartments, but even apartments can be good in right locations, but avoiding off the plan, basically everything,
A 4-pack of apartments on the beach at Bondi, Manly, Cronulla, St Kilda would have done as good as any house in Australia in
100%.
Byron Bay. So, but on average, houses have smashed their performance of apartments. So mine and your preference would be houses and townhouses.
Yeah.
But every now and then we grab a little unit, and those units for most people have done 200-300K in the last 5 years.
We bought Max a place, like he only had a 500K budget, and we bought him a unit on the beaches of Brisbane for about 500K, and then he has now sold it less than 18 months later for $650,000.
That's cool to hear. I didn't know he'd sold it. That's smart.
Yeah. So like, they do work in certain instances. It's just trying to avoid these things where you're paying such a premium and so many other people are taking the profits, off the plan units and townhouses, things in major large complexes. I heard a sad story the other day. Someone in 2018, they bought basically a brand new unit in Melbourne, good location and everything, but small new apartment. They sold it 8 years later they bought it for $540,000. They sold it 8 years later for $570,000. And I've heard that story many times, but the unfortunate reality when we logically unpack that is it's like we bought a new apartment at the top of a real estate cycle, and it was just unfortunately bad timing on that particular investment. Had have they spent that 540 on a house in Brisbane at the same time, they would have almost tripled their money.
One of the things that I was talking to that couple yesterday about was, how do you find the fundamentals of real estate? Like, there's 3 big rocks for me, and I'm simplifying because there's hundreds that we look at internally. But if I was going to go, okay, I've decided that I'm going to look at Melbourne, right? And I'm decided that I'm going to look at West Melbourne, but there's bloody 80 suburbs out there. How do I quickly compare one suburb versus another to refine it down? For me personally, I go straight to 10-year growth rates and I look at, okay, well, in the last 10 years, this suburb's done 3% a year, this one's done 9%. It says to me that the 3% suburb has done significantly less performance in the same market. So that is my gold, absolute, like gold, silver bullet, whatever you want to call it. Like that is the most important thing when I figured that out. And I figured this out from buying a shitload of Residex reports back in the day. So I bought these reports and I used to buy properties using these reports. And he had a 70 or an 80% confidence rating over 15 years of picking these suburbs and the performance being in line. And I remember my second property was a 5-bedroom house with a little granny flat out the back. I bought it for 213K on the Central Coast, and it was renting when I bought it for 600 a week. And I'm like, if I could just have a few of these, I'm done. I'm like leaving IBM and I'm retiring. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in his suburb report, it was the most affordable suburb I could buy, and it was expected to do 9% a year for the coming 5 years. It doubled in value in that 5-year period. It took me about another, when we only found this out about 4 or 5 years ago, we really started to like get it. We were already working around Brisbane and the Sunny Coast and the Gold Coast and the Sydney markets with this understanding, but not all suburbs in one market are the same. So if you choose a winner, which is a metro market, which according to Simon Priestley has done about 8.2% per year for the last 50 years in Australia, then if you can find a suburb in Brisbane that's only done 4%, or Melbourne or Sydney, it's effectively 50% cheaper than neighboring suburbs or other suburbs in the city, and it's 50% cheaper than its 10-year average performance. It's like buying a Tesla or a Disney or an Apple stock for 50 cents in the dollar in
Mm,
COVID,
mm,
and now it's rebounded
mm.
and gone back, or the last GFC. It's like there's fundamental value in the Apple, Disney, Tesla brands, but sometimes the market just sends it to the down with everything else, and it's not really pricing in that particular company or stock. And it's the same with real estate. So right now, there are suburbs in Melbourne that have done 10, 15% a year for the last 10 years. And there's suburbs like 5Ks up the road that have done 3 to 6. And so that's number one. Number two is vacancy rates.
Mm.
I like them to be below 2%, which is undersupplied.
There's a caveat to vacancy rates as well. Like, in CBDs, those vacancy rates will skew
Yeah,
because there's a lot of new supply brought to the market. And sometimes, if you're on the outskirts of town, if there's a new suburb opening up just neighboring, it can skew those vacancy rates. So I like established suburbs there as well
I like
that
that.
don't have, like, that are mostly houses that don't have much development potential. It's already been developed. So the vacancy rate should roughly sit around that level. And we've been tracking these in Brisbane for 10 years now. And the suburbs that have had low vacancy rates have always had low vacancy rates.
Yeah,
They don't change.
I love that, man, because that's such a fundamental, established, high quality suburbs without a huge amount of infill, new development, or apartments getting put in.
And that'll continue in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, and Perth to an extent. Like, you look at the statistics coming out of the ABS, and between Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, they're going to equate to almost 80% of the Australian population. So because of that, you're having, anywhere from 130 to 160,000 people moving into New South Wales and Victoria every single year, over 100,000 moving into Queensland every single year. So naturally, we can't just go up. We're going to go out. It's
We're
the
gonna go out.
urban sprawl in Australia. It's not like a New York or a Tokyo or a London where they just keep going up. Like, they will continue to go out. So these new suburbs will continue to open up. Like, I remember going out to Kellyville in Sydney for school for some sports thing once, and I'm like, this is the boonies. Like,
Yeah, this is farms,
yeah,
right?
are
Back
we in
then.
Mudgee? Like, it felt so far away, but I'm like, now it's like a completely fully developed suburb with, like, 80% owner occupiers, over $2,000 per week average household income, chronically low vacancy rates, and now it's going out to Box Hill and further. So these things will continue changing. It's just obviously taking stock on where it's at right now.
I love that. And I think a vacancy rate below 1% will do two things. If it holds, prices based on Commonwealth Bank's data will eventually go up, and rents will come up as well, because there's too much pressure and demand in that suburb for those two things to not happen over time.
Because naturally, if you don't have availability for a rental property, what a lot of people are going to do under the table is they're going to go to the property manager. Hey, I know you've got it listed at 550 per week right now. I'll give you $600 per week. And, that starts to happen as a collective, and you see the rents go up, or people are like, well, stuff it. I'm in a position to buy a property, so I'm just going to buy it.
100%. And when vacancy rates are low and house prices are low, and it's a capital city, in Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane, and Sydney in the last 10 years, that's why almost all those markets have doubled now. And then the third one, equal third one, is DSR scores.
Mm.
Just an easy way for the average person to get like 8 or so different indicators into one number. I like to buy when the suburbs at 55 to 70 out of 100 if I can. 75 is okay. Once it goes over that, it's hot and it's running away normally. And I like the incomes to be high too. Like as high as possible, to be honest with you, because it means that rents and house prices can go up, and people that live there that earn too much money will eventually put it back into their own houses in the future.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think there's much else that matters as much as those things. Obviously, we look at so much more than that, because obviously there's the macro level, which is like the global, like the Western economy. Where are we at within the grand scheme of like the long Kondratiev wave cycle, or the long 18.6 year real estate cycle? We need to have a very macro sense of where we're at, and that will help you dictate where you should invest. And then on the local level here in Australia, looking into those capital cities and figuring out which one of the 7 looks good right now based on history and based on what's to come in terms of population growth, demand to supply. And then, once you're in that market, then you're looking at every single suburb against all of these key performance indicators to figure out, well, what are the diamonds in the rough? What are the handful of suburbs that look more undervalued than the others? And then once you get to the suburb level, we're then overlaying all of these other bits and pieces as well. And the collective of this is number one, to give me confidence as an investor and go, well, I've done the work. I know that that is the right decision. Now I just need to find the right property.
Yeah.
Plus, based on what we've experienced as buyers agents and investors, is you manufacture a higher return on investment. And at the end of the day, like, for some reason, if people were to invest in stocks, it's all about the percentage return on investment. Everybody is concerned about that percentage ROI. But for some reason, property, because I think 70% of people are owner occupiers, they don't care so much about the percentage ROI, but we're investing. Like, you should absolutely be looking on that. And ideally, you want to be beating the national average and hopefully that market average. And if you're doing this right, you absolutely should be.
I love that. Like, I agree. And, we don't mean to overwhelm anyone with this. What we're hoping to do is just tool everybody up so that they can make better decisions than I made and go out there and get yourselves a better outcome as well.
Yeah, and then take action. But I think the last thing for buying that first property is, once you've gone through this, you've bought the property, you've settled on the property, you're working with your property manager, you've got it tenanted. It's time to treat that property like a business. We always send through our tax investment tax advisory spreadsheet to every single client at the end of the process, which is something that you've worked on over 15 years to make sure that we are tracking the numbers. I think a lot of people miss that piece and they don't look after it in the right way. And, if we come back to what do you want, like, where do you want to be in the future? If you are looking to replace 100K per year, and right now you're trading 40 hours per week to earn 100K per year, I'm not saying that this requires 40 hours per week, but it's going to replace that 100K. It does require a bit of work. And if you do it right, 2 to 3 hours per year, it's not much to make sure that, you're on the right interest rate, the property's rented for the right amount of money, you're maintaining the property in the right way. Just a bit of a quick pulse check. And I sort of think about it like a separate business, because the business is making me money and I need to make sure that I've got my finger on the pulse and I know where things are heading. So I would just say, like, as a first time investor, start at the beginning with managing that portfolio to the best of your ability.
And, little tips and tricks on that you and I have both done is, when you get your first property bought and it shows up in your bank account, obviously you've got your normal bank account. Let's say it's with Commonwealth and it's like, Ben savings. And then it's like, let's say I bought a property, it would be like Albert Street, or it would just be Margate or whatever, home loan, and it would be Margate offset. I think it's really important for every first timer to make sure they get their bank manager or broker to get an offset account so that all of your savings can go in there. The other thing that I do is I get all of the rent paid into that one account, all of the tax benefits paid into that account, all of the expenses pulled out. And then it's sort of like its own little ledger. And it's like that property's standalone. I keep my savings as savings, and I have that little property running as a business, like you said, and just nicknaming those things, like setting up we use Microsoft To Do, but there's heaps of different online scheduling or to-do list tools that you can use. And I'm just like, well, the insurance is due on this date. And on the 1st of January each year, I send my property manager an email saying, hey, how's it looking this year? I was hoping to increase the rents. What do you think? If the tenant moves out, can you please get a bond clean for me, get the carpets cleaned, get the outside of the property high pressure washed, and can you please like tidy up the gardens? And then it's just out of my mind. I don't have to think about it. In that to-do list as well, in May each year, I go and catch up with my accountant and I'm like, hey, this is the year so far. Is there anything we need to do before the financial year? When the financial year's over, there's another alert in the to-do list, and that's like catching up to do the tax return and getting the maximum tax benefits from the property too. And by automating it the way that you and I have, we are at 2 to 3 hours a year versus some of our other clients who haven't gone through that process and they're still spending, you
2 to 3 hours a week.
yeah. And it's like, I get our nature when we're fearful, anxious, and we don't completely get everything to just hyper control. And that was my nature more than anyone else's we've ever worked with. But as you set up better systems, better processes, and better people, it becomes easier and easier and easier to let go. And when you've got the right broker and accountant and solicitor and property manager in place, your job just becomes to hit the tennis balls to those guys and to make sure that you're managing the managers.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you're checking in with those people as required, everything else, like, let them do what they do.
Yeah, they're the professional, right? But you need to set those expectations and be like, this is what I expect of you. And now there's clarity. Like, it's just like having a good relationship with anyone. There's open dialogue, there's open, honest communication. And then everybody knows that there is give take in that situation. So it's not just going out there and buying it and just being like, oh, it's done, the hard work's over. Well, yes, a lot of the hard work is over, but still there is more work required to make sure that it is running like a, well-functioning car.
I also get that there's so many things that we've talked about here, but you and I have bought almost $600 million worth of property now in the last 10 years for clients. Between us, we've bought 22 odd properties now.
Yeah, well, I'm
With your duplex, it's
Yeah.
23.
Yeah.
Like, I'm looking to buy some stuff in Melbourne at the moment too. Like,
Yeah.
I'm 25,000 hours at least into this journey. And I get that a lot of what we've talked about is, hopefully easy for people to digest, but there's a bit to it as well.
Yeah.
And so I just want you guys to know that the vibe and the desire for this content is for you guys to hopefully find it, because not many people do. But if you do find it, to like slowly come on this journey. And I promise you that our goal every single year is that by the end of the year, you'll be a sophisticated, educated investor that hopefully is living a better life and lifestyle too, because you're enjoying the journey towards where you want to be and you're taking the pressure off yourself and ultimately making the best decisions for yourself. Or if people feel like reaching out every now and then, like we love this too. We love helping people, come under our wings or hold hands with us and go through the journey and get the team and get the plan and get the most kick-ass property in the right suburb at the right time.
Start like I did, start like Hayden did, start like Ben did,
Fuck, that would have been
fast
nice.
track it, just fast track it if you want to. But yeah, it's a lot to go through. It's probably one to listen to a second time, I reckon. It was a fair
I was
nugget of
expecting
gold
this
in
to be
there.
a 15 to 20 minute one, and then we just went deep.
Yeah,
straight
well,
up.
when these long format ones come out, we always end up going down some rabbit hole that takes us down another rabbit hole. But I loved it. I think there's a lot of value there. I hope everyone agrees.
G'day guys, my name's Ben and I'm the director here at Pumped on Property, and I just want to say a massive thank you for watching our content today. Now, if you're thinking about buying an investment property in the next 3 to 12 months, then the team and I would love to offer you a one-on-one strategy session. In that session, we can talk about exactly where you are right now, where you'd like to be longer term, and we can deeply educate you on the Australian market. And then you can take that information and go and absolutely smash it on your own, or potentially become one of the small number of clients that we work with each week. To book your session, all you have to do is go to www.pumpedonproperty.com and click that book your free strategy session button. But either way, we wish you all the best on your journey as an investor to financial freedom.